Well, welcome everybody. Crossroads is a one church in 4 different locations, so let's welcome our other locations. What do you say, James Brown?
Let's do it.
Hastings and Cottage Grove and Egan and Woodbury. Let's just say, hey, welcome everybody. This is the incomparable James Brown, the godfather of souls, joining me here today. And I want to begin with a statement that you know and I know is true if you've ever opened up your Bible, the New Testament, and specifically Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, which record the life and teachings of Jesus. You know the statement is true. And it goes like this. Following Jesus means what? Learning how to forgive others. You know that's true. That's what Jesus requires us to do. If we get in line to follow him, what he's told us very clearly is it's going to involve something. And what it involves is forgiving other people. Now, I wish we could stop right now as we talk about forgiveness and just say, I wonder how many of you have heard a sermon on forgiveness in a church in the past. My guess is you've heard many sermons about forgiveness. Why? Because preachers like to talk about it. In fact, it's a good thing to talk about, isn't it? In fact, let's just do a real quick all-campus survey. How many of you have heard at least one sermon on forgiveness in a church service? All right, just about everybody. I think everybody has. And I know I've given. How many of you given?
Oh, 4,000 or 5,000.
Wow, that's
Just
a lot.
Estimating.
Yeah, you're older than you look. Although that gray in your beard is really coming out.
Why are you laughing, everyone? That's not funny.
I haven't given that many, but I've given literally dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens. And as a giver of many sermons on forgiveness and one who has received many sermons on forgiveness, what I can honestly say is this: forgiveness is always harder than the sermons make it out to be. Yeah. We're hearing amens here in Woodbury, and my guess is I'm hearing amens in all of our campuses right now. Yeah, forgiveness is always harder than the preacher people make it out to be. Why is that true? Because it's unnatural. It is atypical. Forgiving one another is not something that we earthlings find easy to do. And that's why, please hear this, that's why we nurse our wounds. That's why we hold on to our hurts. That's why we continue to relive the pain, relive the event, relive those words that were said or those deeds that were done. That's why we continue to hold on to the resentment and the anger and the bitterness toward that person who has wounded us. And my guess is the odds are, across all of our campuses, many of us are holding on to those hurts. Many of us are rehearsing that pain. Many of us are nursing those wounds, whatever they might be. And if you are, and you're maybe even dreading the fact that we're talking about this today, we just want to say to you, we get it. We get it. Forgiveness is always harder than the sermons and the preachers make it out to be. But don't miss the other thing that I said earlier. Following Jesus involves learning how to forgive other people.
Yeah, and so that is possible. As a follower of Jesus, forgiveness is possible. The question is, how do we do it? What is the method? What is the way that we can access and act on the forgiveness we've been called to give? And so to do that, we want an example, a real life example of what that looks like so that we can picture it in our mind. We can see the way before we find our way. And so we're going back to the main character of this series. So far in this series, it was all a dream. We've been looking at a guy by the name of Joseph. And so he's the main character in this story and in this series, and we're going to head back to him again today. So if you got a Bible, I want to go ahead and encourage you to open it up to Genesis chapter 37. Genesis chapter 37. And while you're getting there, for those of you that are new, and there are many of you who are new today, particularly as a result of our baby dedications that we're having today, I just want to catch you up to speed on where we've been in this series so far. So if you're taking notes, I'm going to buzz through some key words that will give you a trajectory for where we have been and where we're going today. So here's the story of Joseph in about 2 minutes. So Joseph, this character that we're looking at, he was a 17-year-old guy who his dad really, really loved. He had a big family. And it was a highly dysfunctional family, mostly because of his dad, Jacob. Jacob was a bit of a dud when it came to being a dad, mostly because he showed favoritism to Joseph. If you've heard of the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, that's this guy, not Donny Osmond. It's this guy, Joseph, that we're studying. And Jacob loved him. And because of that love that his father had for him, it made his brothers exceedingly and increasingly jealous, so much so that they wanted to kill him. In fact, they threw him into a pit one day, thinking that they were going to kill him, but instead decided to sell him into slavery. Some Midianite traders were coming through the area, and they sold him for 20 pieces of silver to these traders, who then sold him again in Egypt to a guy named Potiphar. Now, Potiphar was one of the elite in Egypt. He was the captain of the king's bodyguard, and he was one of the royal people in Egypt at that time. And Joseph started working for him, started to ascend in his household. He was in charge of the entire household. The only problem is that Potiphar wasn't the only one who really liked Joseph. Mrs. Potiphar also liked Joseph a little too much. In fact, she made some advances at Joseph that he denied, and then was accused of assaulting her and thrown into prison. While he was in prison, he met a couple of guys who had some weird dreams, and he interpreted those dreams with the promise that they would tell the Pharaoh about him once they got out, but they forgot. And so eventually, as time went on, Pharaoh had a crazy dream. And so he called for Joseph out of prison to interpret that dream. And it's good that he did, because that dream was about an upcoming famine that was going to destroy not just the nation of Egypt, but the surrounding areas as well. And so in the midst of this famine, Joseph continues to ascend throughout the government of Egypt. So much, in fact, that he becomes the prime minister of the entire country. Joseph is now prime minister, second in command of all of Egypt. And as a result of this food distribution project that he put together, his brothers, the ones he left behind that wanted to kill him, have now found their way to Egypt to try to find some food for their families. And it's in this moment that we pick up the story, as his brothers are now before him, bowing down and begging for food, but yet not knowing still that it's him.
Yeah, and I think it's important you heard that last line. They've come to Egypt for food, but they don't know that the guy that they need to get the food from is the brother that they tried to kill. I know this doesn't make sense, but hang in here with us. They have no idea. Joseph's family has no idea where he is. His daddy thinks he's dead. The brothers, the last they knew, they had sold him off to some slave trader. They probably think he's dead as well. And now here they are showing up for grain. It's been 10 years since Joseph and his brothers have seen each other. Joseph has been prime minister of Egypt for 10 years. Way back there in Joseph's life was his homeland. Way back there was Canaan, where he came from. He left everything behind. It was a distant memory. But what was not a distant memory for Joseph was what his brothers did to him. What was not a distant memory was that they left him to die, that they forsake him. They left him, just abandoned him completely. What's not a distant memory is that they were the ones who sold him off to become a slave. What's not a distant memory, friends, is that they're the ones who ruined his life. They're the ones who turned his life upside down. They're the ones who dashed his dreams. And now here they are. Again, it's been a decade, and now here they are in front of him. And all these memories and all these feelings begin to surface. Now, how do we know? How do we know that Joseph's past is still troubling him? And the answer is, in his erratic, weird, strange behavior that he demonstrates when these brothers show up in Egypt to get food during the famine. He immediately recognizes them. And the weird thing is not just his behavior, but that they don't recognize him. And my question is, why? Why don't they recognize their brother? James, Wake up. Why don't they recognize sorry to wake you up. Why don't they recognize their brother? What's your theory on this?
No, I'm on cold medicine. I'm not
okay.
sleeping. I said yes to drugs this morning.
Do not do this at home. Yeah.
The reason that I think they don't recognize him is very practical. Is because he doesn't look the same. They weren't expecting him to even be alive, but now that he's essentially Egyptian royalty, he looks like an Egyptian. He walks like an Egyptian.
He talks like an Egyptian.
You knew that was coming, right? You knew that was coming.
He teed that one up. I had to hit it.
Yeah. I mean, you've seen the pictures of King Tut and ancient Egyptian. I mean, that's what he looked like with the eye makeup and the
shave their
wig,
head.
Yeah, and all that stuff. He looked like someone from that culture. And I think specifically they just didn't expect him to be alive, let alone the prime minister of the nation. And what Phil is getting at is fascinating with his erratic behavior, because all through the story so far, as we've watched Joseph, he's been this rock. He's been this guy who has not wavered regardless of the circumstances that were surrounding him. The ups and downs of his life have been leveled out by his belief that God has always been with him. But yet in this moment, when his brothers show up on the scene, all of a sudden, he starts acting like a weirdo. No joke. He speaks to them harshly. He's really mean to them, but then he changes his tone, and then he's really gentle with them in his words. He throws some of them in jail, and then he lets them go. He turns away, and he kind of runs over in the corner and starts crying. And then he sits them all down in their birth order and has an amazing meal with them. And then he runs out of the room to cry some more.
It's just like you at the office.
Yeah, it's called Tuesday for me.
Tuesday, yeah.
Just kidding. Sort of.
Well.
And so you look at this particular scene and you're like, who is this Joseph? I mean, here he was as this rock, and now he's like this emotional mess. I mean, this is the guy that's supposed to have his royal act together. This is the guy, as we watch him, who has this Midas touch. He's running Egypt, the entire nation, on behalf of Pharaoh. Who is this Joseph? Because he's not acting like the Joseph we've come to know in this story.
Yeah, and so if we were sitting having coffee right now somewhere, just you and I would ask you, what's going on? What's going on here? And if you thought about it long enough, you would come to the conclusion, the answer is, he's trying to find his way right now. He's beginning to wrestle with this thing we talked about right off the top of our time together. He's trying to wrestle with this unnatural thing called forgiveness. This atypical, this hard thing that we've all had to wrestle with. He's trying to navigate that. He's trying to process his pain. He has stuffed 10 years of emotions way down. And all of a sudden now, as he sees his brothers approaching him with their hand out, what's going on? The emotions are coming out. All those feelings, all these emotions that have been stuffed down for a year, for a decade, are now all of a sudden surfacing. And he's trying to figure it all out. And that's why he's acting so weird here. And I want to give you the question of the day. Because the question of the day is this: what do you do when you have the power and the opportunity to get back at those who have hurt you deeply? I want you to think about that, because I know someone's hurt you. And the question is, if you right now had the power and the opportunity to get back at them, let's just say, and you could do it and there would be no repercussions at all. What would you do it? Would you seize that opportunity? Would you grab onto that power and get back at them? Because this is exactly where Joe is in the story. He has the power, he has the authority, he has the clout to do this. And those brothers would be taken to prison. He has the power, the authority, the clout to do this. And they would be shut out, and they would return home, and they would die of starvation. What will Joseph do? What would you do? What would I do? 'Cause this is where we find ourselves as well. Our story mirrors this story so often, doesn't it? And we're going to look at what Joseph did. If you've opened your Bible, let's get right to it, all right? It's Genesis chapter 45, and I'm going to start reading in verse 1. I want you to see with your own eyes what Joe did. because we're going to learn so much from it. This is Genesis 45, verse 1. Joseph could stand it no longer. Again, they don't know who he is. There were many people in the room, and he said to his attendants, "Out, all of you." So he was alone with his brothers when he told them who he was. Verse 2, then he broke down and wept. He wept so loudly, look at this. He wept so loudly, the Egyptians could hear him, and word of it carried to the Pharaoh's palace. Wow.
Yeah, and I think we wanted to spend so much time on the backstory to bring you up to speed, because what you're about to see and are seeing currently with what Phil just read is that this moment is so raw. I mean, just picture. I mean, this is almost like an Oprah reunification here after
Jerry Springer almost.
Well, okay. Or Oprah. Like this reuniting after decades of being apart. I mean, that's where we are here. It's so real. It's so raw in this moment. And you can feel the weight of it. You can feel his emotions just coming out here. All of these years, all of this struggle, all the questions, all the pain are coming to a point. And what's interesting to me is that Joseph knew where his family was. It wasn't like he didn't know the way back home. He did. And he also had the resources to even go back home. He could show up one day and say, sorry guys.
Suckers.
I'm not dead yet.
I'm not dead yet.
Like, I'm still here. And he could have made all that happen, but he doesn't. Instead, over the course of these years, the feelings, they just get jammed down deep inside of him. And they're beginning to come out. Now, and what we're going to see next is the emotional dam breaks. Look at verse 3. It says this. He says to them, he says, I am Joseph. I am Joseph, he said to his brothers. And he asks, is my father still alive? But his brothers were speechless. His brothers were speechless. In the original language, this was written in Hebrew. The literal translation is, and they wetteth themselves. Like that's... No, it didn't say that. I just made that up. That's the new King James Brown version right there.
Which do not ever buy the new King James version.
In your local Christian bookstore soon. Yeah, anyway, so they were stunned, to say the least, to realize that Joseph was standing there in front of him. And I love verse 4, it cracks me up. And Joseph says to them, please come closer. How about no? How about I stay right where I am? But eventually he convinced them, and they came closer. And he said again, I am Joseph. He had to say it again because they couldn't believe it. I'm your brother. And just to remind them, whom you sold into slavery in Egypt, just in case you forgot why I'm here. And I love the twist of tone here. This is amazing. He says, but all that in the past, all that back there, don't be upset about it. Don't be angry with yourself for selling me to this place. It was God. He was behind this. He sent me here ahead of you to preserve your lives. This famine that has ravaged the land for 2 years is going to last 5 more years. There's neither going to be plowing nor harvesting. But again, God sent me ahead of you to keep you and your families alive and to preserve many survivors. Again, so it was God. You see where his faith is? So it was God who sent me here, not you. And he's the one who made me an advisor to Pharaoh, the manager of his entire palace and the governor of all Egypt. Now, if you need a summary for what just happened here, Joseph is telling his brothers, guys, chill out. I know you're a little shocked here, but chill out. I'm not going to hurt you. I'm not going to kill you. Because the one thing I've learned in all of this is that God was behind all of this. He was working all of these things together for the good of you and for the good of this area. God was behind all this. Now, this is the Joseph that we know. This guy who believed and who lived as if God was always with him, wherever he found himself, whatever situation that he found himself in, that he believed without a shadow of a doubt that God was with him, that God was for him, and that God was working all things together for the good of him. And that is where we pick up the story. He says, go back in verse 9. Tell my father and tell him, this is what Joseph says. God, Again, God did this. God made me master over all the land of Egypt. So come down to me immediately. You can live in the region of Goshen, where you can be near me and your children and your grandchildren and your flocks and your herds and everything you own. Bring it all. Bring it all. I'll take care of you there. For there are still 5 years of this famine ahead. Otherwise, your whole household, your animals, they're going to starve. Now go get my dad. Go tell him about my honored position here in Egypt. Describe to him everything you've seen, and then bring my father here quickly. And then the reunification occurs. Weeping with joy, he embraced his youngest brother, Benjamin. And Benjamin did the same. In verse 15, Joseph kissed each of his brothers, and he wept over them. And after that, they knew what had happened, that they had been divinely reunited, and they talked freely with him. Now, I don't know what you think about this story, but to me, this is one of the most vivid and accurate depictions of what we are talking about today. This unnatural act of forgiveness. Unnatural. It's unnatural because it's not our default reaction when we've been hurt. Because this act is something that is so difficult to do. It's so hard for us to step into. But when you do it, when you forgive someone, there's only one word that can describe where that kind of thing comes from. And that word is divine. Divine because it is beautifully supernatural. Forgiveness is not of this world, even though it is something that is desperately needed in this world.
That's so good. Yeah, and what is natural, what is of this earth, and you know this and I know this, is to do the opposite of what Joseph did. When you have the opportunity, when you have the power, what do? You try to get back at the person who's hurt you. That is what's natural. You hate them, you try to hurt them just like they've hurt you. In one word, what we're good at doing or what we strive for in these kind of situations, the opposite of what Joe did is vengeance. It's vengeance. We all know this word so well. It's a passion to get even. A passion. It's the desire to give back as much pain as someone gave you. And the problem with this whole thing called vengeance is it never lives up to its billing. It never does what you want it to do. It never accomplishes the purpose that you have for it, which is to hurt them as bad or worse than they've hurt you. And it doesn't work. The weird thing about it is it does not work. It doesn't end anything. It doesn't solve anything. Your pain, your hurt, when you try to hurt them back, it never goes away. What it does actually is the opposite. It sets off a chain reaction of more pain and more hurt, more fighting, more feuding. What it does is it puts the injured you in the injurer, that other person, on sort of an escalator of pain, an escalator that you can't get off of, an escalator that never ends, an escalator that just leads to more and more and more and more hurt and harm. And some of you are on that escalator right now. Something has happened between you and someone else, and you're on that escalator. Maybe it's with a neighbor, or maybe it's with a coworker, or a boss, or maybe it's a sibling. Maybe it's a dad, or maybe it's a mom. Maybe it's an ex-spouse. Maybe fill in the blank. You're there. You're there with someone else on that escalator of pain right now. Sometimes, and this is so sad to say this, but it's so true, sometimes entire families live on that escalator of pain, which is why some of you right now are actually dreading Thanksgiving. It's why some of you right now are actually dreading the holiday season coming up, Christmas, because you got to deal with all of that drama and all of that fighting and all that feuding and all that all over again. And that's exactly where Joseph was. But the good news is Joseph got off the escalator. And the better news for you and the better news for me is just like Joseph got off it, you, me, we can get off it as well.
So what do we have to do? What did Joseph do? What can we learn from him? What's the key to this? This getting off of the escalator and stepping into forgiveness. Well, it's simply this. And if you're taking notes, I'd encourage you to write this down as well. That instead of looking back, look up. Instead of looking back, look up. We saw Joseph do this very thing. In that moment, he could have said, you remember that thing you did to me? Now it's my turn. He could have looked back. But instead, remember what he kept saying? It was God. It was God who did this. It was God who put me here. It was God who gave me this. It was God who made me prime minister. It was God. He could have looked back. He could have looked back at his pain. He could have rehearsed it over and over again, reliving the hurt. But he didn't. He didn't look back. He looked up. He looked up to God. One of my favorite verses in the whole Bible is from the book of James, this letter that the brother of Jesus wrote. And he said that every good and perfect gift comes down to us from God. I love that. When's the last time that you looked up and thanked God for his goodness, his good and perfect gifts in your life, the blessings that he's brought down to you? When's the last time you looked up and said, thank you, God, for all that you've given me? Instead of looking back at what could have been or what should have been, but looked up and said thanks. Or maybe what we need to do is look up to Jesus and look up to him on the cross and all that he did for us in that moment of dying on the cross for our sin, making a way for us to spend eternity with God when there was no way. This innocent, perfect, beautiful sacrifice for us, guilty sinners. Jesus did that for us. When's the last time you looked up to that and said, thank you, God, for making a way where there was no way? Or maybe look up and remember that God's Spirit is with you and in you. As a follower of Jesus, it doesn't matter what situation you might find yourself in. You can look up and know that God is going to redeem it, that God is going to make good out of it somehow, in some way. In the same way that Joseph's life is a testament to God's goodness behind the scenes, he wants to do that for you as well. If you are willing to let go of whatever it is back there that you're holding on to. He wants to redeem it. He wants to make something from it if you're willing to give it to him, whatever that is. You see, redeeming and restoring, this is the kind of stuff that God does. In fact, redeeming and restoring is what God does best. It's on his job description, that he does that for his people. But not just that, he is also the one who makes it right. The other thing on God's job description is the fact that he is the judge, that he is the one ultimately who is supposed to dispense the justice. Romans chapter 12, verse 17 says this: never pay back evil with more evil. That's the escalator that Phil was talking about. Don't do that. Don't do that. Do things in such a way that everyone can see that you are honorable. Do all that you can to live in peace with everyone. Dear friends, never take revenge. Revenge is not on your job description. It's on God's. Leave that to the righteous anger of God. For the scriptures say, I will take revenge. I will pay them back, says the Lord. And that's what we learn from Joseph. I mean, Joseph is in this moment where he has the power of life and death in his hands for his brothers. He has the gavel in his hands, and he can render judgment. He could have played judge, but he doesn't. Instead, he does something that no one expected. He did this unnatural, yet divinely beautiful act of forgiveness. And it changed not just his brothers in that moment, but it changed his family for generations to come.
All right. If you've heard nothing we've said up to this point, hear this. Your family's past, with all the shame and all the hurt and all the pain, with all the fighting, with all the feuding, with all that you fill in the blank, your family's history does not have to be your family's future. I'll say it again. Your family's history does not have to be, with all the baggage and all the dysfunctionality, it does not have to be your family's future. But it is going to be your family's future unless you step out in a new direction. The same old is going to become the same old unless you step in a Joseph-like way and do something different. And we're here to tell you today that you can do that. That the decision, that the choice is always there. You can release the person, doesn't mean you like them, but you can release them. You can release your right to get back at them. You can release them, or you can rehearse the pain and relive it all. You can put the fire out and walk away, or you can put another log on the fire. You can add more fuel to the fire. You can do what James just said here. You can look up at Jesus. You can look up at what he did for you and look up at all the good things that are happening right now, or you can keep looking back at all the bad stuff. You can drop the gavel, or you can go get a bigger gavel and try to dish out your own version of justice and revenge. The choice is there. That's the point. The choice is there. And I just want to say, because your future is at stake, your family's future is at stake, choose wisely. Choose wisely. Choose wisely. I believe that God brought some of you to Crossroads this weekend because your family needs a Joseph right now. Or God brought some of you here today because your circle of friends, and there's a lot of they need a Joseph. Some of your neighborhoods need a Joseph right now. Some of your schools need a Joseph right now. And my question is, will you do it? Will you be the one to step off that escalator of pain? Will you be the one? Will you be the one to do the hard work of extending forgiveness? There's a lot at stake. Do not miss this opportunity to make the right call, to do the right thing. Now, at all of our campuses right now, we're gonna listen, we're gonna sit together, and we're gonna listen to a song. And what this song is all about, it's all about this God who does new things. That if we will just open ourselves up and surrender to Him, that He is in the business of breaking new ground. He's in the business of taking grapes and crushing them and making new wine. But it all starts with you and I just opening ourselves up and being willing to surrender to this new thing, this new wine, this new ground that He wants to break in our lives. So as this song is sung at all of our campuses, would you just sit and ponder and maybe even pray about what your next step is going to be? All right?